When Sergeant First Class Daniel Harrison seized the front of Specialist Lena Hart's uniform and dragged her half a step toward him in full view of Alpha Company, the whole motor pool seemed to lose its breath. Boots stopped shifting on the wet pavement. Low voices vanished mid-whisper. Even the loose metal halyard on the flagpole clicked once and then hung still, as if the morning itself understood something had just gone too far. Harrison's face was inches from hers, hard with fury, the cords in his neck standing out as he shouted into the cold gray air. Lena's dog tags had been pulled sideways against her throat. One hand clutched the manila folder pressed to her chest so tightly the paper had begun to bend. Across the front, stamped in red, was a word nobody wanted attached to his name. Confidential. Beneath it, typed in black block letters, was a line that made 3 soldiers in the front rank stare as if they had seen a live round roll loose across concrete. Subject, SFC Harrison. Behind them, mounted on the blackboard beside the bleachers, the Army values looked down over the whole scene in white letters large enough for every soldier to read. Loyalty, duty, respect, selfless service, honor, integrity, personal courage. Harrison's fist was twisted in Lena's collar beneath those words. Her breathing stayed measured. Her eyes did not leave his face. She did not grab his wrist. She did not try to step back. The strangest thing, the part the soldiers would remember long after the shouting blurred, was that she did not look surprised. She looked tired, not weak, not beaten, tired in the way a person looks when fear has already had its turn and found there is nothing left to take. Before I tell you what happened next, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I always enjoy seeing people from around the world listening to these stories. And if stories about courage, sacrifice, and humanity mean something to you, consider subscribing and becoming part of this community. No one later agreed on Harrison's first words. Some swore he demanded to know who had given her the file. Others said he accused her of ruining the company. A few insisted he used her full name, which almost nobody ever did, and that hearing it spoken that way felt worse than the grip on her uniform. But every witness remembered the same detail. Lena Hart did not blink. Her chin lifted just enough to keep the bunched collar from cutting into her throat, and in that tiny movement, there was something more unsettling than defiance. It looked like acceptance, not of what he was doing, but of what was coming. As if the humiliation of being grabbed in front of the unit no longer mattered because the thing she had carried there was heavier than pride. To the younger soldiers, Harrison was the kind of platoon sergeant who seemed carved out of old Army standards and bad weather. He was not warm. He was not easy. He did not hand out praise to make himself liked. But he knew who needed rent help before the soldier said a word, who was hiding an injury behind stubbornness, who cleaned their weapon only where an inspector might look, and who was one bad weekend away from wrecking their career. He had corrected lies with a glance and sloppy work with a voice that could strip excuses down to bone. He had also stayed late to help privates fill out emergency leave paperwork, taught nervous specialists how not to panic under pressure, and once spent 3 hours in the rain helping a driver repair a wiring issue because he refused to let a soldier fail for not yet knowing enough. Men feared disappointing him more than they feared his temper. That was why seeing his hand wrapped in Lena Hart's collar felt like watching a church bell ring at the wrong funeral. A year earlier, Lena would have defended him. She had not come into the Army loud enough for people to remember her on sight. She came in older than some, quieter than most, carrying student debt, a dead father, and the kind of careful discipline that grows in people who learned early that no one was coming to rescue them from their own bills. Her mother had begged her not to enlist, said the uniform would take more than it gave. Lena joined anyway because she needed direction, needed structure, needed a place where effort might still count for something in a world that had already taught her how quickly things could break. She was not naturally fearless. She was naturally useful. She showed up early, listened the first time, learned quickly, and never made other people pay for her bad mood. By the time she reached Alpha Company, she had acquired the reputation every dependable soldier secretly wants. If Hart said it was done right. Harrison noticed that before she noticed him noticing. Their first real interaction happened in the motor pool during a punishing summer heat that turned the concrete into a griddle and the inside of the vehicles into steel ovens. A specialist from another squad had tried to pin a missed inspection on Lena, claiming she had signed a checklist she had never seen. Harrison had stood there with grease still dark in the cracks of his knuckles, listened to both sides without expression, then asked 3 short questions. By the end of the third, the lie had folded in on itself. The other soldier got the counseling. Lena got only a small nod from Harrison, almost too brief to catch, but she remembered it all week. In a place where too many people mistook volume for leadership, the calm of that moment felt bigger than shouting. The second time he earned her respect, she was limping. A field exercise had left her knees swollen and unstable after she slipped in a drainage rut while carrying more weight than she should have admitted was too much. Lena tried to hide it because she hated being looked at through the lens of limitation. Harrison watched her take 6 stubborn steps, called her over without raising his voice, glanced once at the joint, and sent her to the aid station. She argued. He did not. A soldier who can't walk tomorrow isn't tougher because she limped today, he said, already turning away as if the matter were too obvious to revisit. She pretended the line irritated her. In truth, it lodged somewhere permanent. He had a way of making care sound like discipline, and to a woman who had spent half her life treating her own needs like debts she hadn't earned the right to pay, that mattered. By the time the accident happened, she trusted his judgment more than her own. Private First Class Eli Turner died on a rain-soaked morning that began before dawn and never once felt clean. It was the kind of rain that didn't fall dramatic and honest. It drifted in from the dark and found every seam. It slicked the pavement, soaked gloves, darkened sleeves, and made old canvas smell heavier. The company was scheduled for a convoy certification they had already delayed once. The brigade readiness visit was coming. Slide decks had deadlines. Metrics had owners. Somewhere high above the motor pool, men who would never hear the sound of a brake line under strain were demanding green numbers by sunrise. Eli Turner was 19 and still carried traces of boyhood around the mouth when he smiled. He wrote his mother every Sunday. He kept peanut butter crackers in his cargo pocket because he was always hungry an hour after chow. He called Lena Doc, even though she wasn't a medic, just because once she had taped a split knuckle and lectured him about using his hands like tools instead of hammers. He laughed too quickly, saluted too sharply, and still believed the older soldiers were made of something more certain than he was. People teased him without meanness because he made it easy to love him. The vehicle he rode in that morning should never have rolled. That truth lived at the center of everything, even before anyone admitted it. Several people sensed unease before the first key turned. The first warning looked ordinary. Specialist Ben Ortiz, one of the maintenance soldiers, reported a soft brake pedal on one of the support vehicles scheduled for the route. Not a dramatic failure. No smoke. No collapse. Just the kind of fault procedures are built to catch before routine becomes obituary. Ortiz wrote the note where it belonged. He expected the truck to be deadlined. The weather was bad. The movement could wait. But deadline trucks do not look good when important people want every box green. By 04:30 the rain was steady, the coffee weak, and tempers shorter than the men carrying them. Lena remembered seeing Harrison in close conversation with Captain Reed Callahan near the maintenance bay doors. Callahan was younger, polished, ambitious, the kind of company commander who loved clean briefings and hated anything that made readiness numbers messy. Harrison, by contrast, lived in the harder world below the slides, where the bodies and the machines either performed or failed. Most days they functioned together because ambition and discipline can resemble each other from a distance. That morning, the set of Harrison's shoulders suggested the conversation had ended with something he did not like. Lena almost walked over, almost asked what was wrong, almost said the route should wait until the rain eased. Almost is a cruel word. It gives guilt somewhere to sleep. Instead, she tightened the strap of her Kevlar, fixed a buckle Eli could never seem to fasten correctly in the dark, and climbed into her own assigned vehicle with the uneasy feeling that the whole morning was moving on top of a crack nobody wanted to examine. The convoy rolled out as first lights struggled uselessly behind the cloud cover. For the first half hour, everything felt tense but manageable. Tires hissed on wet road. Wipers moved in dull metronomic sweeps. Radios crackled with clipped updates that sounded normal enough to help everyone pretend normal still existed. Lena sat in the second row and watched rain chase itself across the glass. Once she turned and caught sight of Eli through the blur from the vehicle behind. He lifted one hand and grinned when he realized she had spotted him. She rolled her eyes. He exaggerated the grin, as if he had won something. Then the vehicles rounded a bend, and he vanished from view. It was the last time she saw him alive. The failure came not as an explosion, but as an absence where control should have been. Later, investigators would use language that sounded intelligent enough to make grief sit quietly in a file. They would discuss traction, response time, road conditions, and angles of deflection. But what Lena remembered was a burst of radio traffic cut in half by panic, a shouted warning, and the sight of taillights ahead jerking sideways in a way no trained driver would ever choose. The vehicle carrying Eli fishtailed, tried to correct, missed the correction, and went over with a metal violence that taught everyone watching, all at once, that they were no longer inside training. They were inside the minute that splits a life into before and after. Everything after that moved with the brutal efficiency of drilled instinct. Doors slammed. Mud-soaked knees. Someone screamed for a medic. Someone else was already trying to cut power. Lena ran before she understood her own shoulder had taken damage in the abrupt stop of her vehicle. The bank beside the road was slick. She hit it more sliding than stepping, boots losing purchase in the churned wet earth. The rolled truck lay twisted in the ditch, one wheel spinning uselessly, engine ticking in awful little metallic sounds. The smell of hot fluid, mud, and wet rubber mixed into something sharp enough to taste. Eli was trapped. Not dead yet. Trapped. That distinction would matter to Lena for months, because hope had enough time to rise before it was strangled. She heard his name shouted, heard another voice say not to move him, heard Harrison arrive and take command with the clean authority he always had when things went bad. Stabilize. Cut the battery. Check the driver. Get extraction support. Find the med bag. It was the Harrison she knew, the one whose mind became all-purpose when others panicked. For one brief stretch of time, Lena believed that meant they could still save Eli. They could not. He died before they got him free. The official phrase later would be incompatible with sustained life. The human truth was uglier. A boy who had joked about breakfast less than an hour earlier stopped answering when they called his name. Harrison was the one who checked for a pulse, held his fingers there too long, then looked away before anyone could watch his face change. Lena never forgot that. Not because it proved he cared. She already knew he cared. She never forgot it because it was the first time she saw something inside him crack and remain hidden only because soldiers are trained from the beginning that breaking and showing are not the same thing. The company mourned the way military units often do when there is still work left to accomplish. Respectfully, efficiently, and with more restraint than grief deserves. A memorial was built. Rifle, boots, helmet, dog tags. Soldiers stood in pressed uniforms while the chaplain spoke about sacrifice, service, and the mysteries that remain unanswered this side of heaven. Eli's mother sat in the front row holding the folded program in both hands, so tightly the paper curled at the edges. Lena stood with her arm in a sling, eyes fixed on the empty boots because the photograph above them hurt too much to look at directly. Harrison spoke only once, 3 brief sentences delivered without visible tremor. He called Eli a good soldier. He said the platoon would remember him. Then he said some absences never stopped counting against the people left behind. At the time, Lena thought that was grief. Months later, she would realize it was confession trying to survive in a place that punished it. The investigation moved fast, which comforted no one. Statements were taken, weather reports attached, vehicle paperwork reviewed. The findings came back with the practiced efficiency of a machine built to tidy suffering into acceptable language. Rain, reduced traction, loss of control, no evidence of misconduct rising to criminal negligence. Recommendations for further safety emphasis. End of packet. End of packet. That phrase stayed in Lena's body like a splinter too deep to grip. Her own statement had been given under medication, exhaustion, and shock. She remembered the conversation between Callahan and Harrison in the rain. Ortiz looking tense near the bay, Eli's grin through the glass. The radio burst, the roll. Nobody asked her about possible brake issues, because by then that detail had already been trimmed out of the narrative before it ever reached her page. Ortiz grew quieter in the months that followed. The driver of Eli's vehicle was transferred after rehab and never again seemed comfortable in crowded places. Harrison became harder. Callahan became smoother. The company moved forward because that is what units are designed to do when moving forward is easier than looking back with honesty. Lena tried to move with them. She could not. Sleep became hostile. Sometimes she woke hearing the broken burst of radio traffic. Sometimes she dreamed Eli was still alive inside the rolled frame, speaking calmly through crushed metal, asking why no one had checked the brakes again. Her shoulder healed faster than her nerves. She jumped at sharp metallic noises, hated rain on pavement, carried guilt she could not name clearly enough to argue with. The army sent her temporarily to battalion administrative support while restrictions ran their course, a move that felt merciful and humiliating all at once. She missed line work. She missed competence measured in action. She hated the fluorescent stillness of offices where tragedy became packets and packets became distance. It was inside that distance that she found Harrison's file. Not dramatically, not with music or revelation. Real life rarely offers those mercies. Battalion legal support operated out of a narrow room at the end of a hallway that smelled faintly of toner, old coffee, and dust warmed by machines. Lena spent weeks inventorying archived counseling exhibits, redacting names from old actions, and reconciling hard copy storage against digital records that had not been updated with enough care. Most of the folders meant nothing to her. Failed drug tests, reprimands, property losses, injury reports, separation packets. She stamped, sorted, logged, and shelved, trying not to think about the human collapse tucked inside Manila. Then one afternoon she pulled a packet tied to an unrelated barracks damage claim and found, folded into the back as if shoved there in haste, a photocopy that made the room go soundless around her. It was a vehicle fault sheet dated the morning Eli died. She checked the vehicle number once, twice, 3 times. It matched. Her eyes moved to the remarks block. In careful penmanship, later replaced by a cleaner version elsewhere, for words sat on the page like a hand closing around her throat. Brake pedal soft on press. For several seconds, she did not breathe. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Somebody laughed in the hall. A copier spat out a page in the next room. All of it sounded far away. She read the line again. Then she pulled the official copy associated with the movement packet. Same date. Same vehicle, same initials, no break note. The clean version was green across the line. Relief hit first, so sudden it made her dizzy. Relief that the dread she had carried for months without language had not been madness. Something had been wrong. Something had been seen. Something had been written. Then came the worst question. If she found this by accident, who had hidden it on purpose? She did not report it that day. That failure mattered more to her than anyone else would ever understand. For 48 hours, she kept the photocopy folded inside the notebook in her cargo pocket and told herself she needed more context before sounding an alarm. It was not entirely a lie. Context did matter. But beneath the responsible language lived fear. Not fear of paper. Fear of consequences with names and ranks and families attached to them. If the accident packet had excluded a known break concern, then Eli Turner's death was no longer just tragedy. It was a decision dressed as misfortune. Decisions have owners. Owners have allies. Lena knew enough Army by then to understand that truth does not climb a chain of command on its own. Someone must carry it. Usually someone lighter and easier to lose than the truth itself. She tried to reason herself back into safety. Maybe the break issue had been corrected. Maybe Ortiz had written the note before a successful repair. Maybe the cleaner sheet reflected the true final condition. Maybe the photocopy had been misfiled from another event. Maybe. Each maybe died a little harder when she pulled a sworn statement from Specialist Ben Ortiz attached to a separate maintenance workflow review. The statement was maddeningly cautious. Ortiz affirmed that he had conducted the required pre-movement inspection, that deficiencies were noted and addressed, and that he later signed the cleared form after receiving direction from supervisory personnel. Supervisory personnel. No names. No accusation. Nothing that would survive on outrage alone. But the sentence throbbed on the page. He later signed the cleared form after receiving direction. Direction from whom? Lena returned to her barracks that night and laid the documents side by side on her bedspread while rain tapped softly at the window in a thin echo of the weather that had taken Eli. She stared at the pages until the edges blurred. Then she did something that frightened her more than the documents themselves. She considered destroying them. Not in a bonfire. Not in some dramatic act of denial. Just tear them. Flush them. Let the dead stay buried beneath the version already accepted. Let Ortiz keep whatever fragile piece remained. Let Harrison keep his rank. Let the company believe it had lost a soldier to reign instead of to compromise. Let the army stay clean in the places people needed it clean. She held the papers and imagined what reopening this would do. It would pull people back into statements, force memory to testify, and send another wave of grief through a mother who had already endured burial. She couldn't do it. She couldn't destroy them either. So on a Saturday, she drove to the cemetery where Eli Turner was buried. The road carried her beyond town, beyond strip malls and gas stations and the edges of post, out where the land opened and churches appeared every few miles like people still trying to negotiate with heaven. She had not called ahead. She planned only to stand there briefly and leave. But when she reached the grave, Eli's mother was already there in a folding chair, cardigan wrapped close though the day was warm, hands resting still in her lap. Susan Turner recognized Lena at once. Mothers remember the faces of the people who were with their children at the end, even if they wish they didn't have to. Lena apologized for arriving unannounced. Susan said she was glad someone from the unit still came to visit. That sentence broke something open. They talked for nearly an hour before Lena said anything about the file. Susan told stories first, small ones, devastating in their ordinariness. Eli as a boy leaving cabinet doors open and insisting he would remember them later. Eli begging for combat boots when he was 10 because his uncle wore them. Eli on the phone complaining about cold eggs in the dining facility and asking whether the family dog still barked at the mail truck. Once Susan laughed softly at the memory, then immediately pressed her lips together as if laughter near his grave required apology. Lena sat on the damp grass feeling the vast unfairness of a world where a woman could know the exact way her son used to laugh and still not be able to hear it again. When Lena finally spoke, she chose her words carefully. Not names at first, not accusations, just enough to tell the truth without making promises she wasn't sure she could keep. She said she had found reasons to believe the accident had not been only weather. Susan listened without interrupting. When Lena finished, braced for tears or anger, the older woman lowered her eyes to the stone and said, "I knew something didn't fit." Lena stared. How? A mother can tell when people have given her the whole truth and when they've only given her enough. Susan's voice was gentle, but not weak. The officer who called me sounded practiced. The chaplain was kind. The soldiers were respectful. But when I asked whether my boy suffered, everyone answered quickly. When I asked whether the truck had any issues before movement, there was a silence. She lifted her gaze. There was steel in it now, tempered by grief instead of erased by it. Silence tells its own story. Lena's throat tightened. If I push this, it could hurt a lot of people. Susan looked back down at Eli's name. It already did. Then, after a long pause, she gave Lena the sentence that would follow her into every choice that came afterward. But don't do it for revenge. If you do it so the next mother isn't sitting where I am. That was the moment the file stopped being about blame and became about duty. Lena returned to base with a clarity that felt less like courage than like the end of pretending. She documented everything. Dates, packet numbers, archive discrepancies, cross-references. She photographed what procedure allowed her to photograph, logged what she could log, and built a chronology precise enough to survive skepticism. Every time fear whispered that she was emotional, she answered it with another citation. Every time doubt told her she was overstepping, she checked another record. That was when the pressure began to find her. At first it looked like inconvenience. A cabinet she had accessed the previous afternoon was suddenly missing the packet she needed. An archive request sat, pending, for no reason anyone could explain. A staff sergeant from operations, who had never once shown interest in legal storage, wandered into the office asking casual questions about what she was working on. Then Alpha Company's clerk called to ask whether Lena planned to return after restrictions because Harrison had been asking. She had told no one in Alpha what she had found. One evening she returned to her barracks room and nothing was visibly wrong. That was what frightened her. Nothing overturned. Nothing stolen. Just a faint wrongness in the position of things. Her notebook was tucked beneath her pillow instead of inside it, where she always kept it. The latch on her wall locker sat just slightly off. She stood in the center of the room listening to the air vent hum and the distant laughter outside the building, and knew somebody had looked. From that night on, she carried the most important copies on her person whenever regulations allowed. The folder evolved too. No longer a loose collection of discoveries, it became a formal packet. Summary memo on top. Supporting exhibits tabbed. The original fault sheet. The cleaned version. Ortiz's statement. The archive discrepancy. The email traffic she would later find. Each page placed where it belonged, so that if anyone tried to dismiss her as a grieving specialist out of her depth, the paper would do the speaking she might not be allowed to finish. Harrison confronted her the first time in private. It happened near the supply cage behind the company area at dusk, the sky bruised purple and gold above a line of chain link, while someone farther off slammed a conics hard enough to rattle the fence. Lena had gone there to deliver a signature sheet. Harrison stepped out from the side of the building as if he had been waiting. Not close enough to trap her. Close enough that walking past him would turn tension into open disrespect. He looked tired. The kind of tired men carry when sleep no longer does the work it used to. You've been spending a lot of time in battalion legal, he said. Not a question. Yes, Sergeant First Class. You finding what you need? His tone was ordinary. His eyes were not. I do my assigned work, Sergeant First Class. He watched her for a moment. You always were careful with words. She said nothing. Careful doesn't mean safe, he added. It should have sounded like a threat. Somehow it sounded like warning. He did not touch her, did not raise his voice. He only said, whatever you think you found, understand this. Not every truth helps when it comes out. Sometimes all it does is spread damage. Lena looked straight at him then. Did it help Eli Turner when it stayed buried? For the first time, something flashed across Harrison's face that was too raw to hide quickly enough. You don't know enough, he said. Then tell me. His gaze shifted toward the parking lot, where two privates were arguing over a fuel card as if ordinary stupidity still mattered. When he spoke again, his voice had lowered. There are people above your pay grade who know exactly what happened. If this opens wrong, they won't carry it. Ortiz will. Maybe the driver. Maybe you, for sitting on documents after you found them. Maybe anybody convenient. His eyes returned to hers. That's how it works when panic climbs. It looks for lighter weight first. It was the most honest thing she had heard from him since the accident. Are you one of the people who know exactly what happened? She asked. He did not answer. That silence told her more than denial would have. The moral dilemma widened there. If Lena pushed forward carelessly, Harrison could be right. The system might isolate the lowest-ranking soldiers, distribute blame until it lost shape, and let the men who turned readiness into roulette survive behind better language. Ortiz could lose everything. The driver, already barely functioning after the crash, could be dragged back into scrutiny until whatever healing he had managed broke apart. Lena herself could be accused of mishandling documents or failing to elevate them immediately. And Captain Callahan, polished and plausible, could walk away with little more than a memo. But if she did nothing, Eli Turner remained a weather incident with a folded flag attached. Either way, somebody paid. So Lena made the choice that scared her most. She decided she would not rely on instinct, rumor, or even Harrison's partial warning. She would find one fact too solid for anyone to dissolve. The fact lived in an email. Battalion offices run on digital traffic the way convoys run on fuel. Constantly, quietly, and with more risk than anyone admits. Lena had no access to anything secret. She didn't need it. She had enough authorized visibility into archived correspondence and administrative routing to follow document control numbers associated with the original accident file. For 3 evenings, she sat in front of a dim monitor after most people had gone, tracing attachments and timestamps through tedious indexes that others skipped because boredom can disguise truth better than deception ever will. Near the end of the 3rd evening, inside a chain tied to readiness updates sent the night before the movement, she found it. The message came from Captain Callahan to multiple recipients, including Harrison and the motor sergeant. Most of it was routine command noise. Vehicle counts, timeline reminders, evaluation windows. But in the middle of the message sat one sentence that made the room seem colder around her. Need all platforms green by first light. No exceptions unless catastrophic. No exceptions unless catastrophic. Lena read it until the words stopped being English and became pressure in written form. There it was. Not implied. Not reconstructed later through memory or resentment. Written. Archived. Sent. She printed it through the formal request function so there would be a record of access. And when the page slid warm from the printer into her hand, She understood that she had crossed a line from suspicion into evidence. The next morning, she took what she had to Staff Sergeant Miller, the NCOIC, in battalion legal support. Miller was one of those soldiers whose composure had outlived other people's drama by several years. She listened without interrupting, glasses low on her nose, hands folded once Lena finished laying out the chronology. When she reached the email, Miller's face changed only slightly, but in an office like that, slight changes mattered. "Where did you get this?" Miller asked. "Archived administrative correspondence linked to the movement records. Requested for this matter? It should have been requested originally." "That's not what I asked." Lena held her gaze. "No, Sergeant." Miller removed her glasses slowly. "Then right now this is already dangerous. It was dangerous before I found it. That is not the point." Miller lowered her voice. "Hart, if what you are implying is true, this needs to go the right way. Carefully. You cannot carry this around like a crusade." Lena almost laughed at the word crusade, as if she were enjoying any piece of it. "What's the right way?" Miller's silence answered before she did. Finally, she said, "I can elevate concern regarding irregularities in the archived packet. I can do that. But once it goes up, you don't control it." "I don't control it now." "No. But you still control how much of yourself gets crushed under it." That warning would have stopped many people. It nearly stopped Lena. But then she remembered Susan Turner's hands resting quietly in her lap beside a grave, and the way she had said, "Don't do it for revenge." Not revenge. Responsibility. "Elevate it," Lena said. Miller studied her for several seconds. "If I do, the company may know where it came from." "They'll know anyway." They did. The official reopening did not happen overnight. There were preliminary reviews, quiet consultations, fresh requests for records, carefully phrased questions to brigade legal. Packets moved. Copies were compared. Old statements were reread. The Army can be infuriatingly slow right up until the moment it becomes very fast. Somewhere in that narrow span between suspicion and action, Harrison found out. Lena never learned exactly how. Maybe Callahan sensed movement and started asking questions. Maybe someone in legal spoke one sentence too many to the wrong person. Maybe Harrison had simply worn the uniform long enough to smell inquiry in the air before anyone named it. What Lena did know was that on a rainy Thursday afternoon he asked her, in a voice too calm to refuse, to walk with him to the chapel. The chapel sat empty except for them. Colored light from the stained glass fell across the wooden pews in narrow strips that made the small sanctuary feel both intimate and exposed. Lena had not been inside since Eli's memorial. Standing there again tightened something in her chest. Harrison remained standing near the front, cap in one hand, eyes on the brass cross, as if speaking to a symbol might be easier than speaking to her. "They're reopening it," he said. She didn't ask how he knew. "Yes." He nodded once. Rain whispered against the windows. "Do you think I don't know what's in that packet? Then tell the truth." His mouth twitched, not a smile, just pain finding a shape. "You still think truth is a clean thing?" "I think it's necessary." At that, he turned. The look on his face held none of the usual command hardness. Only a man who had run out of places to put what he carried. "I asked Ortiz if he'd ride in that vehicle," he said. When he said maybe, I heard yes, because yes was what the captain needed, yes was what the schedule needed, and yes was what I needed if I wanted that morning to keep moving. He swallowed once. "That's the truth." The room seemed to tilt around her. "Then why didn't you say so?" Lena asked. "I did." She stared. 2 days after Eli died, I wrote a memorandum accepting responsibility for allowing the vehicle to move under unresolved doubt. I sent it up with my initial statement. It disappeared. Shock hit so hard it felt like anger. "You're lying." "I wish I were." His voice had flattened into that dangerous steadiness people use when feeling anything openly would finish them. "Callahan said I was reacting emotionally. Said wording mattered. Said if I forced it, I'd wreck the driver, Ortiz, maybe the platoon. Said the investigation would establish facts and we needed discipline, not emotion." His eyes found hers again. I let him talk me into silence because part of me wanted to believe the clean report would contain the damage. Lena's hands closed into fists. "That's not containing damage. That's helping bury a 19-year-old kid." "Yes," he said. No defense. No explanation beyond the truth already given. Just yes. The simplicity of it hurt more than excuses would have. He took one careful step toward her. "If this opens now, Callahan will say he gave command emphasis, not unlawful pressure. Ortiz will admit he signed the clear form. I'll admit I accepted the vehicle. They'll call it distributed failure and spread blame until nobody carries the whole thing. Unless you're careful, the people who pay are the ones already bleeding. What do you want from me? He hesitated. That hesitation said everything. A proud man asking for mercy is often asking for control dressed in different clothes. I want time. For what? To handle him. Handle him how? His jaw tightened. To decide whether I still deserve the men who call me sergeant. That should not have moved her. It did anyway. She left the chapel more torn than before. Harrison had confirmed the worst and complicated every easy version of it. He was guilty. He had also tried, however briefly, to take responsibility before fear, hierarchy, and pressure closed around him. He was not innocent. He was not simple. That made him harder to condemn cleanly and impossible to excuse. 2 days later, the missing memorandum surfaced. Miller, suspicious enough to distrust every gap in the original routing, had requested a full attachment reconstruction from archive transfer images. Buried inside a mislabeled skin set, attached to administrative correspondence nobody had reopened in months, sat Harrison's memorandum exactly as he described it. Signed, dated, explicit. He stated that he had been informed of unresolved break concerns, that he had exercised poor judgment in allowing movement after only a hasty reassessment, that command emphasis on full execution influenced his decision, and that responsibility for that decision should rest with him rather than the junior maintenance personnel who acted under his direction. There it was, the truth he had once pushed upward and later failed to force into daylight. Miller read it twice, then leaned back and said, "Well, that changes the geometry." It changed more than that. Harrison ceased to be merely the man who buried everything and became the man who had failed after first trying not to. Still responsible, still culpable, but no longer the lone architect of the lie. By then the matter had gone higher. Lieutenant Colonel Stephen Abrams received a briefing. Brigade Legal became involved. Orders were prepared to formally reopen the investigation and serve relevant personnel. Because the packet was sensitive, because compromise now seemed possible, and because Lena knew every page well enough to notice if one disappeared, Miller ordered that the final physical packet stay under controlled hand carry until Abrams or Command Sergeant Major Delaney received it directly. That was how Lena ended up walking into the motor pool that morning with Harrison's file against her chest. The timing could not have been worse. Alpha Company was scheduled for formation at 0600. Their first sergeant had retired the previous week, and Captain Callahan intended to make a public announcement about interim leadership and continued readiness. Harrison was widely expected to step into the acting first sergeant role until a permanent replacement arrived. Battalion wanted the packet served before any public move could proceed. Miller gave Lena the folder at 0530 in a locked office still smelling of stale coffee and printer toner, and said, "You take this directly to Lieutenant Colonel Abrams or the CSM. No stops, no detours. If anybody else asks for it, the answer is no." Understood. "Yes, Sergeant." And heart. "Yes, Sergeant. You've already done a hard thing. Don't turn it into a heroic one. Just do the next right step." Those words walked beside her into the gray morning. The company area was already coming awake. Engines coughed somewhere beyond the base. Soldiers assembled in ranks on damp pavement. The sky hung low and swollen with cloud, and the smell of wet canvas and diesel lay across the yard. The black values board by the bleachers looked darker than usual in the weather, the white lettering severe as scripture. Lena was supposed to wait near the admin entrance for Abrams. Instead, Captain Callahan saw her first. He stepped out of the company building crisp and composed, cap perfect, mouth arranged into the expression commanders wear when they intend to appear calm regardless of what the morning brings. The moment his eyes landed on the red-stamped folder, something sharpened in his face. "Specialist Hart," he said. "What do you have there?" "Packet for the battalion commander, sir." "Give it to me. I'll take it." "I was instructed to deliver it directly, sir." "By whom?" "Staff Sergeant Miller, sir." The ranks nearby were still settling. Commands were being called. No one should have been listening, which meant several people absolutely were. Callahan lowered his voice. "This is not the place for games." "It isn't a game, sir." His smile held for a second too long, and then thinned. "Hand me the folder." He reached for it. Not violently. Not yet. Just with the assumption of a man used to other people making room for his will. Lena shifted back and kept both hands on the packet. That tiny movement was enough. Harrison saw it from 20 yards away. Whether he recognized the folder, Callahan's expression, or Lena's refusal first, nobody knew. What mattered was how fast he moved once he understood enough. 1 second, he was aligning the final rank. The next, he was crossing the pavement with the hard, direct speed of a man whose fear had just found a body to strike. "Who told you to bring that here?" he demanded. Lena did not answer. His eyes dropped to the folder, to the red stamp, to his own name typed beneath it. Something raw and unguarded flashed over his face. Recognition, shame, panic. Then the worst thing. Certainty that the truth he had failed to control was now loose in the open, where every hand could see it. Callahan snapped, "Sergeant First Class, stand down." It was exactly the wrong command at exactly the wrong moment. Harrison looked from the captain to the folder to Lena, and whatever anger, fear, guilt, and desperation he had been keeping in separate compartments finally broke through the thin wall between them. He grabbed the front of her uniform and yanked her toward him. The formation went silent. Somewhere a private in the back rank whispered, "Oh no." The morning narrowed to the space between Harrison's furious face and Lena's steady eyes. "What have you done?" he hissed. "Not who gave it to you. Not why are you here. What have you done?" Even in that moment, even with his fist in her collar and 24 soldiers watching, Lena understood something new. Harrison was not only afraid for himself. He was afraid of the blast radius. Afraid Callahan would redirect everything downward. Afraid Ortiz would take the hit. Afraid the truth would emerge badly and still fail the dead. Fear had finally stripped rank off his voice and left only the man beneath it. The terrible thing was that understanding did not make his hand acceptable. She said, very quietly, "I'm finishing what you started." The words hit him like a slap. His grip did not tighten, but it stopped moving. Something in his face changed. Not softened. Stopped. That was when Lieutenant Colonel Abrams' vehicle rolled into the lot. Every head turned. Tires hissed on wet pavement. The battalion commander stepped out with Command Sergeant Major Delaney at his side, took in the frozen tableau in one glance, and changed the temperature of the entire yard without raising his voice. "Release her," Abrams said. Harrison's hand opened immediately. Lena stepped back, straightened her uniform with one hand, and kept the folder pressed against her chest with the other. Not a tear, not a shake. Her throat burned where the collar had pulled, but the steadiness inside her had gone oddly cold. Callahan moved first, eager enough to speak that his urgency gave him away. "Sir, this is a misunderstanding." Abrams cut him off by lifting one hand. The battalion commander looked at Lena. "Specialist Hart, do you have a packet for me?" "Yes, sir." "Bring it here." The walk from where she stood to where Abrams waited could not have taken more than 6 seconds. It felt longer than the past year. Every soldier in formation tracked her. She could feel the eyes on the red stamp, on her reddened collar, on Harrison standing motionless with his jaw set like stone. She crossed the distance and handed the packet over with both hands. Abrams opened it there. Not fully, not to conduct a hearing in the motor pool, but enough to confirm what it was, enough to see the summary memo, enough to recognize the subject line and the attached exhibits. Delaney stepped closer, reading over his shoulder. Callahan had gone pale without losing posture. Harrison stared at nothing. Abrams closed the folder. "Captain Callahan. Sergeant First Class Harrison. You will accompany me immediately." He turned to Delaney. "First Sergeant from Charlie Company will take this formation." Then he looked back at Lena. His expression did not soften, but something in his voice registered the scene that had just occurred. "Specialist Hart, report to battalion legal after medical evaluation." "Yes, sir." Only then did the yard exhale. What happened next did not unfold in public, but the emotional center of the story was never really in the investigation rooms. It was in the choices people made when there was finally no clean place left to hide. By noon, the post-rumor network had done what it always does, moved faster than paperwork and with less mercy. Everyone knew Harrison had been served. Everyone knew Callahan had been called in with him. Half the battalion thought Lena had set a trap. The other half thought she had saved the army from one of its own blind spots. A few called her brave. A few called her disloyal. Several said both, depending on who was in the room. Medical documented the bruising at her collarbone and throat. Miller took one look at the marks and swore softly under her breath, then said nothing else until the office door shut. "You all right?" Lena surprised herself by saying, "No." It was the first honest answer she had given all day. The reopened investigation moved with ruthless speed once public embarrassment entered the equation. Ortiz was re-interviewed. The driver gave a trembling statement confirming he had mentioned the brake feel before movement. Archived emails were seized. Routing logs were examined. The original memorandum's disappearance became its own question. Under that pressure, Callahan did what ambitious men often do when their polished certainty begins to crack. He retreated into language. He had not ordered unlawful movement, only emphasized readiness. He had relied on his senior NCOs. He had expected maintenance concerns to be resolved at the appropriate level. He had never intended risk beyond normal operational tolerance. He had not buried anything personally. He had simply followed the investigation process as advised. His sentences were clean, plausible, and morally vacant. Harrison's were not. He did not deny accepting the vehicle. He did not deny pressuring Ortiz after the captain's message made clear the expectation of full execution. He did not deny that he had allowed fear of broader fallout to keep him silent when his memorandum vanished. His shame made him more credible than Callahan's polish made the captain. Still, credibility did not erase guilt. Harrison had chosen movement over certainty. Eli Turner was dead because enough men, at enough levels, had told themselves maybe would hold. The most painful interview Lena sat for came 3 days later. Not with investigators. With Ortiz. He waited for her outside legal after his re-interview. Cap crushed in both hands, shoulders bowed beneath a weight smaller men would have tried to shake off by blaming others. The hallway hummed with fluorescent lights and distant office chatter. He looked like he hadn't slept in weeks. "You were right," he said before she could speak. "If this opened, it was all coming back. Ben, I keep thinking about that morning." His laugh was brief and bitter. "Like that's new. I keep thinking if I had just refused to sign. Just refused." He looked at his hands. Would he still be alive? Lena knew there was no mercy in the truth, so she chose a different honesty. "I don't know." Ortiz nodded as if that answer, precisely because it didn't comfort him, was the only one he could trust. "Harrison told them not to dump it all on me," he said quietly. "Did you know that?" She didn't speak. He said he gave the direction. Said I was a specialist trying to keep up in a system that teaches you real fast who can end your future. Ortiz swallowed. "He's guilty. I know that. But he's still trying to stop it from rolling downhill." There it was again. Complexity. The thing that makes justice harder and truth more expensive. Harrison had failed. He was also, at last, refusing to let the lowest-ranked men carry his failure for him. That night Lena sat alone in her barracks room and cried for the first time since the motor pool. Not loud, not dramatic. The kind of crying that happens when a body understands before the mind does that outrage is easier to carry than sorrow, and once outrage starts thinning out, sorrow rushes in to fill the space. She cried for Eli, for Susan Turner, for Ortiz, who had signed what he should not have signed because the Army teaches obedience long before it teaches where obedience must end. She cried for Harrison too, which angered her. Not because he deserved no pity, but because pity felt like betrayal of the dead. She had wanted a villain. Villains are easier. Villains let the rest of the world remain organized. But the truth was worse. A decent soldier had made a coward's choice under pressure, then spent months drowning in it. A polished officer had hidden behind process. A system built on values had required a specialist with bruises on her collarbone to drag those values back into the yard where everyone could see them. The command climate hearing was scheduled 2 weeks later. By then Harrison had been relieved from his role. Callahan was under formal inquiry and no longer looked anyone in the eye unless he had to. Soldiers moved more quietly around company areas, as if the whole battalion had learned that ordinary routines can rest on top of buried rot. Lena testified. So did Ortiz. So did the driver. So did Miller. Each statement tightened the line. Susan Turner came to post for the administrative memorial review attached to the findings process, because the Army, when forced, does sometimes try to let families hear truth from actual mouths instead of folded letters. Lena saw her in the back of the room before proceedings began, sitting with both hands clasped around a purse on her lap. There was no accusation in her face, Only the kind of composure grief carves into people who have already survived the worst thing. The turning point of the whole story did not happen when evidence was presented. It happened when Abrams offered Harrison the chance to make a final statement. Callahan had spoken first, careful, bloodless, and defensive in the language of command. He acknowledged oversight. He regretted communication failures. He maintained there had been no deliberate concealment on his part. Sitting there, Lena watched Susan Turner's eyes go flat with the exhaustion of hearing her son translated into bureaucracy one more time. Then Harrison stood. He was in dress uniform, every line correct, every insignia in place, but he did not look like a man standing inside rank anymore. He looked like a man standing beside it. For a moment he said nothing. The room held that silence the way people hold breath near a graveside. When he finally spoke, his voice was lower than usual, stripped of command force and left with only truth. "I knew there was unresolved doubt on that vehicle," he said. "Not certainty of failure, doubt. And I let command pressure make me treat doubt like inconvenience instead of warning. A private is dead because I chose movement over certainty." No one shifted. No pen moved. He continued. "I told myself we had mitigated enough. I told myself the mission window mattered. I told myself maybe it was close enough to safe. Then when my memorandum disappeared, I let silence pretend it was discipline. It wasn't discipline. It was fear wearing a uniform." Lena felt the words strike the room like weather. Harrison turned then, not to Abrams, not to the panel, but to Susan Turner in the back row. Soldiers do not often look directly at the people their decisions harmed. He did. "Ma'am," he said, and his voice roughened for the first time, "your son deserved a platoon sergeant who chose his life over a timeline. He didn't get one. I am sorry in a way language does not cover." Susan Turner did not cry. She sat very still, one hand rising slowly to cover her mouth, and the sight of that small, human gesture hurt everyone in the room more than weeping would have. Callahan looked down at the table. That was the moment the balance changed. Not legally, emotionally, morally, publicly. Harrison stopped managing fallout and started carrying it. The findings were brutal, though not theatrical. Callahan was formally reprimanded and removed from company command pending further action. Harrison accepted responsibility and requested retirement in lieu of extended contest, knowing full well that the stain on his service would remain attached to the years he had once worn with honor. Ortiz received administrative action for falsifying the maintenance form, mitigated by coercive pressure and his cooperation. New maintenance release procedures were implemented battalion-wide. Safety emphasis stopped being a slide and became, for a while at least, something soldiers actually felt watching them. None of it brought Eli back. That was the truth sitting underneath every official result. Weeks later, after the paperwork storms had slowed and Post had moved on to fresher gossip, Lena received a message asking whether she would come to the battalion memorial garden at 1800. No explanation. Just a name at the bottom she had not expected to see again. D. Harrison. She nearly ignored it. In the end, she went because unfinished things have a way of staying louder than concluded ones. The memorial garden was small, quiet, and half forgotten by everyone except the people who needed it. Stone benches, a flag, brass plaques catching the last gold of the evening. The air smelled of cut grass and warm earth after a day without rain. Harrison was there already, in plain clothes now, looking stranger without the uniform than Lena would have believed possible. Smaller too, not physically, just stripped of the shape rank had given him. He stood when she approached. For a second neither spoke. Then he held out a sealed envelope and a small object wrapped in cloth. "What is this?" she asked. "Letter for Mrs. Turner," he said. "Not excuses. She's had enough of those." His eyes dropped briefly. "And that," he nodded toward the cloth bundle. "That's the platoon sergeant diamond from my old pin-on. I had it removed before the hearing. Eli used to stare at it during counseling sessions like it was some kind of sacred object. He asked me once what it meant." Lena looked down at the bundle in her hand. "What did you tell him?" "That it meant the soldiers came first." Harrison let out a breath with no humor in it. "Turns out symbols are easy. Living up to them is the hard part." He looked at the memorial plaques. "There's going to be a small shadow box inside the company heritage case for Eli. Chaplain asked if there was anything from leadership worth placing with it. There shouldn't be. Not for me. But if you think that diamond belongs there, not as honor for me, but as warning about what that symbol is supposed to mean, then use it. If not, throw it in the river. Lena said nothing for a long moment. In the fading light, he looked like a man who had lost much of what had defined him and understood that some losses were not punishments but mirrors. She remembered his hand in her collar, remembered Eli's grin through rain-streaked glass, remembered the memorandum he had written and then failed to fight for when it vanished. She did not forgive him in that instant. Forgiveness is not a button honest people press to feel noble. But neither did she feel the clean hatred she once wished she could hold. "Why ask me?" she said. "Because you're the one who did what I should have done the day that packet disappeared." The answer hit harder than apology. She took the envelope, kept the wrapped diamond. "Mrs. Turner should decide whether she wants the letter," Lena said. He nodded. "That's fair." He turned as if to leave, then stopped. "I grabbed you that morning because I saw the file and knew the truth was about to break in public. But that's not the whole truth." He faced her again. "I also grabbed you because some part of me was angry you had the courage I didn't. I need you to know that." The honesty of it stunned her. He added, "That doesn't excuse it." "No," Lena said. "It doesn't. I know." That was the last full conversation they ever had. Susan Turner agreed to read the letter. She did it privately, sitting on a bench near her son's grave while evening spread across the cemetery in soft strips of gold and shadow. Lena waited a respectful distance away. When Susan finished, she folded the letter carefully and stared at the headstone for a long time. Finally she asked, "Did he mean it?" "Yes," Lena said. Susan nodded once. "Meaning it doesn't fix it." "No, ma'am. But it matters." That, in the end, became the emotional truth of the whole story. Not that remorse erases damage. It does not. Not that confession resurrects the dead. It cannot. What mattered was that truth finally stood where lies had been standing, and people who had hidden behind process were forced into the light of what their choices had cost. Months passed. The company changed. New leadership arrived. The maintenance release procedures became stricter. Soldiers who once signed forms by habit started reading them with attention sharpened by memory. The values board by the bleachers remained where it had always been, but men looked at it differently after that. Words become heavier when you've watched someone fail them in public and another person force them back into meaning. Lena returned to line duty once her shoulder fully healed, but she was not the same soldier who had limped into battalion legal. She moved with more calm and less need for approval. She no longer assumed rank and righteousness naturally traveled together. She learned that courage is often lonelier than discipline, and that loyalty without integrity is just fear dressed up as belonging. Younger soldiers started coming to her with questions they didn't know how to ask their chain. She never used Eli's name lightly. She never used Harrison's either. But when a private once told her he felt pressure to sign off equipment he hadn't fully checked because everybody wanted to go home, Lena looked him in the eye and said, "A fast answer can bury a slow funeral. Check it again." He did. The shadow box for Eli Turner was placed in the company heritage display the following spring. It held his photograph, his dog tags, a strip of name tape, and, after Susan Turner gave permission, the small platoon sergeant diamond wrapped in a card beneath it. The card bore no praise for Harrison. Only one line. "Soldiers come first," or the symbol means nothing. Some people thought it was too harsh. Others thought it wasn't harsh enough. Good. Certain stories should leave room for conscience to keep arguing after the room empties. On the anniversary of Eli's death, it rained again. Not hard, just enough to darken the pavement and wake old sounds. Lena stood at the edge of the motor pool after duty, watching the drops gather on the hoods of parked vehicles. The formation area was empty. The black values board stood silent against the gray. For a moment, she could see the whole opening scene layered over the present. The hand in her collar, the folder against her chest, the stunned faces in rank after rank. She remembered how powerless she had felt and how strange it was that power arrived only after she stopped trying to protect herself from consequence. A young private approached hesitantly and asked whether the story was true. The story, as if the whole battalion had already turned one of the worst mornings of her life into legend. Lena looked at the rain, then at the private. "Enough of it is," she said. He shifted awkwardly. "People say you didn't flinch." Lena almost smiled. "People remember what helps them." He thought about that. "Why didn't you?" She looked back at the empty formation area. because by then I was more afraid of staying quiet than I was of being embarrassed. The private nodded slowly, as if storing the answer somewhere he might need later. When he left, Lena remained there a little longer, listening to rain tap the asphalt with the soft persistence of memory. She thought of Eli, of Susan Turner, of Ortiz reading forms more carefully now than some officers read careers, of Harrison, somewhere outside the army, living with the kind of sentence no court has to write because a conscience can do it better. She thought of the moment in the chapel when he said fear had worn the uniform. He had been right. Fear does wear uniforms. So does courage. From a distance, they can look alike. The difference is in what they protect when the cost comes due. If stories like this remind you that honor is not a slogan and integrity is never automatic, consider subscribing and staying with this community. And if this one stayed with you, tell me in the comments what moment hit you hardest, or what you would have done if you were the one holding that file. The hardest truths are not the ones we discover. They are the ones we finally decide to carry. And long after the shouting was gone, the image that remained was not his hand on her collar, but the quiet way she kept holding the truth beneath a sky that had seen too many men confuse strength with silence.